Did you know that cocaine made Black men uniquely murderous and better marksmen? Yeah, I didn't know that either until the world was told that in an article that was written in the New York Times. And what is interesting about this article and reading it and getting to dive even deeper is how it changed our look at the war on drugs, politicians, presidents, systematic racism, all because of this one article. The war on drugs actually started back in the 1800s. It was a particular time between 1898 and 1914 that there started becoming a lot of articles that exaggerated the association of heinous crimes and cocaine use by Blacks. In some cases, suspicion of cocaine intoxication by Black people, particularly Black men, was a reason enough to justify lynchings. On February the 8th, 1914, a particular article in the New York Times came out that read, Negro cocaine fiends are a new Southern menace. The author, who was a distinguished physician, stated that the Negro fiend imagines that he hears people taunting and abusing him, and this often incites homicidal attacks upon innocent and unsuspecting victims. He continued by stating a story about the quote unquote cocaine nigger that was in the South that dropped 5 men dead because he was on cocaine. When this article dropped, it created complete pandemonium because back then cocaine was legal. And so for a Black man to be able to get cocaine and become invisible, superhuman, Superman like, he can knock 5 men off just by being high. He was a better marksman to shoot. And they even thought that if you even shot a Black man while he was on cocaine, it would do nothing to him. The world began to think that cocaine made Black men uniquely murderous and better marksmen. It also produced a resistance to the knockdown effect of fatal wounds, bullets fired into the vital parts that would drop a sane man in his tracks, failed to check the Negro fiend. In that same year, Congress passed the Harrison Act, which regulated and taxed the production, importation, and distribution of opiates and cocaine. Now, we all know about alcohol prohibition. In 1919, the 18th Amendment was ratified, meaning that all sales, manufacturing of anything alcoholic, liquor, moonshine, was banned. Now, what a lot of people don't know that there was also an act, the Marijuana Act, that in 1937, there was a tax sale on cannabis and marijuana. But things turned up a notch when President Richard M. Nixon signed the Controlled Substance Act in law in 1970. This statute called for regulation of certain drugs and substances. And in June 1971, Nixon officially declared a war on drugs, stating that drug abuse was public enemy number one. In the 1980s, President Reagan decided to reinforce and expand Nixon's war on drug policies. In 1984, his wife, Nancy Reagan, who we all know through the Watergate scandal as Deep Throat, launched the Just Say No campaign, which was intended to highlight the dangers of drug use. In 1986, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which established mandatory minimum prison sentences for certain drug offenses. This law was later heavily criticized as having racist undertones because it allocated longer prison sentences for offenses involving the same amount of crack cocaine, used more often in Black communities, as powder cocaine, used more in white communities. 5 grams of crack triggered an automatic 5-year sentence, while it took 500 grams of powder cocaine to merit the same sentence. So here we are, all from an article in the New York Times that stated the Negro Fiend, the black man on cocaine, is uniquely murderous, and that if you try to even shoot him if he's high, the bullets is going to bounce off like it's a trampoline. That started the Harrison Act, which regulated cocaine and opiates. That then started 1919, the alcohol prohibition that banned alcohol. That then started 1937, that taxed marijuana and cannabis. And then good old Richard Nixon, with his honest self, came in the 70s and decided to start the war on drugs, making it public enemy number one. Created the DEA in 1973. And then his good old pal, Ronald Reagan, with Miss Deep Throat, came in the 80s. Just say no. Cracking eggs in frying pans, saying this is your brain on crack. DARE programs. DARE. I used to have one of those search. Which, now mind you, say no to drugs. But it's how we got here that is telling. It's how we got to this place that shows systematic racism. It shows how presidents are good and honest. And it shows how a whistleblower can change it all up. There was an interview in 1994, and he told it all. The reason why there was a war on drugs. During a 1994 interview, President Nixon's domestic policy chief provided inside information suggesting that the war on drugs had ulterior motives. In the interview he conducted in Harper Magazine, he explained that the Nixon campaign had two enemies: the anti-war left and Black people.
1968, and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
Now, a lot of people will tell you that even the worst part of this war on drugs was when reporters and journalists came out specifying that the DEA was the ones that was actually peddling the drugs and pushing the drugs into Black and brown communities, continuing on with Nixon's vision of breaking up, tearing up, vilifying, destroying a community of people.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
We know that the crack epidemic of the 80s and early 90s was devastating to African Americans, to the communities and to the families, to the children that was having to be raised without parents, without a dad, without a mom. Crack babies, homelessness, diseases. It completely destroyed a community that still faces the ramifications of that till today. And to know that it started from an article that pushed propaganda to scare people. This is truly an American horror story.